far we have studied about pollination. Now let us move on to fertilization. Pollination is immediately followed by fertilization, and this fertilization involves fusion of the male pronucleus present in the pollen grain with the female pronucleus present in the egg cell. Fertilization involves fusion of the male pronucleus, the haploid nucleus, with the female pronucleus in the egg cell. Remember, the egg cell is present in the embryo sac. This fusion results in the formation of a diploid cell called zygote, and this zygote subsequently develops into the embryo, and that embryo becomes the seed. Fertilization follows immediately after pollination. Immediately after pollination. Within few minutes after the pollen grain is deposited on the stigma of a flower, the pollen grain is involved in the process of fertilization, and this process of fertilization takes place in fertilization involves 5 steps. The first step is germination of the pollen grain. Germination of the pollen grain. The pollen grain that has been deposited on the stigma of the flower starts absorbing certain secretions from the stigma. As a result of these secretions, as a result of absorbing these secretions, the pollen grain swells. Egg cyme ruptures, and in time the inner membrane comes out in the form of a projection called pollen tube. This process represents germination of the pollen grain, formation of the pollen tube. In the meantime, the generative cell divides to form 2 haploid nuclei. 2 haploid nuclei. So at this stage there are 2 haploid nuclei. The second step is called Growth of the pollen tube. Intine has formed a projection called pollen tube. The pollen tube starts elongating. It enters the style of the gynoecium and elongates, passes through the entire length of the style, and finally reaches the ovary. The third step is called entry of the pollen tube into the embryo sac. Once the pollen tube reaches the ovary, pollen tube establishes contact with the ovule and enters the embryo sac. This process is known to be helped by the synergids. That is why the synergids are called helper cells. The fourth step is release of the male gametes. Remember, the generative cell has divided into two haploid cells representing the male gametes. Now the male gametes, the two male gametes enter the embryo sac. The fifth step is fusion of the gametes. Fusion of the gametes. Two male gametes now have entered the embryo sac. One male gamete fuses with egg cell. Another male gamete fuses with the secondary nucleus. Remember, secondary nucleus is formed by the fusion of two haploid nuclei called primary nuclei.